Hello everyone, I am Pedro, and I'm here to talk on how to integrate shared state into propositions as types. This is joint work with Luís Caix. We start with shared state, which is everywhere. It's the backbone of imperative programming languages, such as Java, but also functional programming languages, such as Haskell, offer support for shared state. However, despite its ubiquity, safely programming with state, aliasing, and concurrency is considered to be quite a challenge. There is therefore an effort to find tools that in some way or another try to discipline the usage of shared state. The other half of the title concerns propositions as types, which is a bridge between logic and computation that allows knowledge to be transferred between these two fields. Under this bridge or correspondence, logical propositions are connected to types of a typed programming language, logical proofs to programs, and proof simplification to program evaluation. Propositions as types is a notion that is quite well established for the functional core of programming languages, for example, the simply typed Lambda calculus and System F. And a decade ago, it was extended to concurrent programming languages by connecting linear logic to session types. However, it seems that shared state does not fit into propositions as types. One of the main challenges is to reconcile the two seemingly opposite notions of program behavior and proof simplification. Because on one end, we have non-deterministic behavior that emerges of racy concurrent programs that manipulate shared state. And on the other end, we have a confluent notion of proof simplification, which is required by propositions as types. Furthermore, with the presence of high-order store, we can potentially express non-terminating programs, such as the Landin's not, which compromises the existence of proof normal forms, another requirement by propositions as types. Our proposed solution to accommodate shared state into a propositions as type framework is PySS, a session type process calculus with first-class reference cells. PySS is a session-based concurrent programming language. Several interactions occur at the same time, and they occur always on matching dual pairs. Furthermore, interactions are structured around the notion of session types, which are dynamic entities that prescribe a communication protocol describing which and when interactions take place. At a logical level, PySS is a conservative extension of the session-based interpretation of classic linear logic, which results from the addition of two duality-related modalities, box why not, which types reference cells, and box bang, which types cell usages. The logical principles associated with these two modalities are inspired by differential linear logic. In PySS, typing judgments have this form. There is a process P on the left and a typing context on the right. And the typing context is a partial finite assignment from session names to types. On understanding typing contexts, it might help you to picture the process P as a black box, with a collection of wires X and Y's, whose endpoints satisfy a certain protocol, specified by the A's and B's. Our typing judgments are dyadic, which means that the typing context is separated into two parts, a linear, denoted by delta, and an unrestricted, which absorbs weakening and contraction and is denoted by gamma. Channels on the linear side cannot be copied nor discarded, whereas channels on the unrestricted side can. The basic rule of our type system is the logical cut rule, which is interpreted by interactive composition. This defines two processes, P and Q, that run concurrently, interacting on a single private linear session X. Process P provides a behavior of type A along session X, whereas Q offers on X a dual behavior of type dual A. We annotate the cut with the offering type of its left argument. We now turn our attention to the typing rules involving shared mutable state. We start with a typing rule that introduces the box why not modality and which is computationally interpreted by a process that defines a reference cell available on a C and which stores a persistent session V. The behavior at V is defined by a replicated process P. Logically, the rule corresponds to box Y naught dereliction. I would like to call your attention to the fact that the replicated process P does not depend on free linear names, as you can see on the premise of the typing rule. Particularly, it cannot depend on free cell references, so our language cannot express circular data structures, such as the Landin's knot. However, a replicated value stored in a cell may of course allocate and use reference cells locally. We now turn to operations on reference cells. We start with the free operation, which introduces the box bang modality and is interpreted by a thread that releases its cell usage C and continues as Q. In fact, observe that the cell usage C is no longer accessible by the continuation Q. Logically, this rule corresponds to box bang co-weakening. When a cell is not shared by any other thread, free will cause the cell to be deallocated. The other two cell operations are read and write, which are atomic operations. Read accesses the contents of cell C, which are copied and received by the continuation Q at perimeter V. The write operation destructively updates the contents of cell C with a session V implemented by process Q1. Then the writing process continues as Q2. Even though the cell changes its contents, the update is not strung, and so the cell protocol is left unchanged. Logically, these typing rules incorporate box bang called dereliction. We will now illustrate the sequential cell operations with a short example. Consider the following system, in which a reference cell at session C is initialized with a persistent Boolean value true, the cell being typed by box Y naught bool. The cell is composed by cut, with a process that first reads the cell on input parameter X, then writes the Boolean false, frees the cell usage, and continues as P. After the read interaction, a persistent copy of the Boolean true is spawned on X and composed by cut with the client continuation. After the write interaction, the cell contents are updated from true to false. Since the cell is not being shared by any other thread, the free operation will cause the cell to be deallocated. Notice that up to this point, all cell usages are handled linearly, which means that they cannot be implicitly discarded nor copied. Releasing a cell is explicitly indicated by the free operation. However, since there is no point in having mutable state if you cannot share it, we also have a sharing operation. Sharing is introduced by this typing rule, in which a cell usage C is being shared between concurrent threads P and Q. Logically, the share typing rule corresponds precisely to differential linear logic box bang co-contraction. Co-contraction enforces that two concurrent threads share a single cell usage. This is related with the basic acyclicity of linear logic proofs, where in a cut, two threads interact only on a single session. This property is key to ensure deadlock freedom of our typed calculus by purely logical means. Notice, however, that a single shared cell may group all the states shared by the two threads, as in a resource bundle, and the reference cell can be used by any number of client threads by iterated use of the share construct. Other property that I would like to highlight is that sharing in PySS is dynamic, in the sense that the number of clients sharing a common cell usage can grow unbounded and shrink as computation takes place. This contrasts with some session-type languages in which the number of participants sharing a session is statically bounded by the type system. We will now illustrate how this concurrent system executes. A memory cell is being shared between two threads. One thread writes the Boolean true and continues as P1, whereas the other writes false and continues as P2. First, the system is expanded into a non-deterministic sum, in which the two concurrent write operations are interleaved and brought to evidence, using the fundamental law which relates concurrency with non-determinism. Further laws allows the cut to be distributed over sum. Reductions on its summand are now independent, and after the four write operations, we obtain a non-deterministic sum of two cells, whose state depends on the last write operation that took place. A sum process represents a non-deterministic choice between two alternatives, each offering the same typing context. Sums are also present in differential linear logic, where cut elimination needs to generate sums of proofs. Sums internalize non-determinism, allowing us to define a confluent proof simplification. In our model, sums satisfy the expected axioms of non-deterministic sums of process algebras, like commutativity, associativity, and idempotency, remarkably modeled as logical proof conversions. We extend PySS with locking primitives, obtaining what we called PySSL. To the collection of types, we add a pair of dual modalities called locked box why not and locked box bank, which represent locked state and act as a mirror of the basic cell modalities, which in turn represent unlocked state. Then we have locking and unlocking operations that essentially alternate between the two states. Other flavors of co-contraction ensure at the type level that only one single thread may be interacting with a locked memory cell, thereby allowing us to define critical sections. Remarkably, the linear logic type chiplin preserves the deadlock freedom property, where typing ensures a cyclicity in communication, herein in locking. Concerning the method theory, we have formalized the reduction-based operational semantics of PySSL, which is comprised of a structural congruence relation that captures the static laws and a reduction relation that captures the dynamics of our calculus. As a consequence of our proof-theoretic approach, our language enjoys type preservation and deadlock freedom. Since we internalize non-determinism with sums, our calculus enjoys confluence. Therefore, proof reductions and conversions represent proof identities or behavioral equivalences. Finally, we also establish a normalization result by applying a structural cut elimination technique to our calculus. All the detailed proofs can be consulted in the extended technical report. We developed the type checker and an interpreter, which were submitted as a companion artifact for the paper. Both the type checker and the interpreter were written in the Java programming language. We used the Java CC parser generator, and we have made extensive use of the Java util concurrent package to implement the fine-grained concurrent runtime system. Some details of our implementation worth mentioning is that we have committed non-determinism in our interpreter, so that the sum operator is not present in our prodigal runtime system. The share construct is simply implemented by object aliasing, and in order to reduce the overhead associated with thread creation and destruction, we have opted to manage the execution of concurrent tasks for a catched thread pool. All the examples in the paper are validated by the implementation, and we also have developed many others, ranging from the definition of inductive data types, such as naturals and lists, to concurrent shareable ADTs, such as counters, stacks, and queues. These examples illustrate how the presence of standard, essential, and universal type quantifiers harmoniously combine with the basic stateful framework of PySSL. I would like to point out that when running complex examples, our implementation spans thousands of short-lived threads, which synchronize perfectly, such is the power of session types and linear logic. Our development was based on the session-based interpretations of linear logic. On the proof-theoretical side, we draw inspiration from Deal. The works on manifest sharing were the first proposal to represent shared state on top of propositions as types, and then were followed by a series of recent works. To conclude, we defined PySS, a session-type process calculus with first-class reference cells. We showed PySS enjoys the basic properties of propositions as types, as justified by key method-theoretical results. We develop an extension PySSL that allows critical sections to be defined. We develop a type checker and an interpreter, which was submitted as an artifact, alongside with several examples that showcase the language expressiveness. As future work, we like to investigate how to handle linear state and explore how dependent types may express resource invariants. Thank you, and I am willing to take any questions.